Welcome to NACD BoardVision, where leading boardroom advisors, governance professionals, and seasoned directors discuss critical issues related to your responsibilities in the boardroom. Welcome to NACD BoardVision. I'm Peter Gleason, Managing Director and CFO of the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm joined today by Scott Olsen, PwC's U.S. Human Resource Services Leader. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Peter, for having me today.
Scott, we just went through the height of proxy season, and most companies received strong majority shareholder support for their say-on-pay votes. We also witnessed a strong preference by shareholders for annual say-on-pay votes. So what should directors be thinking about now?
Well, Peter, companies should be reflecting on their say-on-pay voting results, as they will be required to explain how those results impact future compensation decisions in next year's proxy statements. Companies may want to consider the level of shareholder support they received against the median of approximately 85% support from shareholders. For example, if a company received 60% shareholder support, they might want to dig a little deeper to understand those results, even though the resolution may have passed with majority support. Directors should be asking themselves what level of negative shareholder vote should trigger greater action on their part.
You're right, Scott. Companies may have to increase their shareholder engagement and have a continual dialogue with their large shareholders to understand what parts of their executive compensation may have created concern and discuss the rationale for those decisions.
And for the companies that did not receive shareholder support for their say-on-pay vote, they likely will need an even higher level of shareholder engagement to discuss their company's compensation programs. In fact, we already witnessed changes during this proxy season in how companies engage with shareholders, like filing proxy amendments or sending letters directly to shareholders to defend their programs against ISS's criticisms. And these practices will continue to evolve.
I agree, Scott, and we can't talk about shareholder support without discussing the influence of ISS. So far, roughly 40 companies have failed their say-on-pay votes this year. All of them got a negative recommendation from ISS. So this shows some influence. On the other hand, ISS gave negative recommendations to hundreds of companies, about 10% of the thousands coming to a vote this year. So roughly 40 out of the thousands is really not that many failures to count.
Peter, this suggests that compensation committee members should act in the best interest of the shareholders and not make changes merely to comply with ISS or other requirements. The real feedback on pay comes from shareholders. This reinforces the fact that if a company's say-on-pay vote passed, with or without ISS's recommendation, directors should still look closely at the level of support and consider how to respond.
Good point, Scott. ISS commonly recommended a vote against a company's executive compensation plan when there was a lack of alignment between pay and performance. There also were instances when they recommended a no vote for plans with tax gross-ups for changing control provisions or when significant severance packages were paid to a CEO or other senior executive. Those are clear red flags, and sometimes there are lawsuits over this. We've seen 5 lawsuits filed in response to negative votes on say-on-pay when companies did not make the changes to shareholders' likings. What other areas of focus do you see, Scott? Is there any good news?
Well, in our work with compensation committees, we've observed directors making changes to compensation plans in the following ways. First, creating plans that are more closely aligned with overall performance, including sustainability. One approach here is to place less emphasis on formulaic plans and increase the use of non-financial measures. Next, lengthening of time horizons. More compensation is being deferred and more companies are establishing performance conditions on long-term incentive grants. Third, being more cautious about severance provisions in new compensation agreements and eliminating tax gross-ups and single trigger change in control benefits. And finally, eliminating or phasing out other executive benefits like SERPs and perquisites. Interestingly, some of these items, for example, the increased use of non-financial measures and longer time horizons, may represent a disconnect between regulatory demands and the fiduciary responsibilities of directors to all shareholders for the long term, and the preferences of some shareholder groups, such as hedge funds, who at times can be a bit more short-term focused.
Paying for performance and long-term sustainability is a challenge, especially when there are disparate views among shareholders. On the regulatory front, there have also been some significant rulemaking activities impacting financial services firms. Scott, can you provide some insight on this activity?
Sure, Peter. Financial services firms are experiencing direct regulatory oversight on their incentive compensation plans. Federal regulators have proposed some principles-based guidance for incentive arrangements for a wide number of financial institutions, and even some prescriptive guidance on deferrals for the largest financial services firms. Companies in the non-financial services sectors may also want to monitor these activities, as they may be viewed by some, including investors, as preferred or best practices for other industries. Again, directors need to do what's right for all shareholders.
On that note, let's close out this session. Scott, thank you for joining me. That wraps up another episode of NACD's BoardVision. On behalf of PwC and the National Association of Corporate Directors, I'm Peter Gleason, and thanks for joining us.